Hello everyone, nice to see you. I'm Abir Singhil, I'm family doctor here, and this is part of the series on mental health and addiction. And my hope is that we start viewing ourselves as humans first, and um, focusing less on the label of the illness that we all have. Um, Illnesses that we all have. So today is one of my favorite subjects. Uh, it is about the mind and how the mind works. So it's really important to understand and conceptualize how your mind functions. So there's anatomical ways of understanding this, like the brain and the cortex and the brainstem and the midbrain and all of that, which is important, which we will get into in another segment. But today I want to focus on a schematic of the mind, and many such exist, and this one I find quite helpful in understanding the way the mind works and how it can become dysfunctional. And so I think this analogy is what I call the subconscious garbage can, and it's how one's subconscious, which is a very powerful computing system that helps us, function day to day, how it becomes functioning more like a garbage can, which is more like a landfill. Stinks. Stuff doesn't move, doesn't get moved out, and then that stinkiness spreads around. So this analogy, I call it the subconscious garbage can. It comes from several kind of ideologies, and I think there's different ways of understanding it. This one in particular delves a little bit into the yogic understanding of the mind, and so draws a little bit on those concepts. So let's get through it. So I'm going to draw out a couple of things here. So we'll just call this whole thing subconscious garbage can. Okay, so the first thing to understand is that our mind can be split into two parts. So the first part, I call it the conscious mind. So conscious mind is a space that you're aware of, you're conscious of, It's kind of like what you're able to contain in your mind and focus your attention on. That's all considered to be in your conscious space. And so that's one part. And then the second part is a bigger part, and we'll call this the subconscious. There are other aspects to this, but we won't get into them today. So the conscious mind, which you're aware of, and the subconscious mind is what's there, but you're not aware of it. So the subconscious mind is a beautiful thing. It's the thing that allows you to park an idea. So, for example, if you want to go to dinners tomorrow, and you're not sure where you want to go, there's a lot of variables to consider, and you can't figure it out all at once. So you say, okay, you know what, let me get back to you. And that you tell your friend, and you put your attention on other things. And what happens is that idea, dinner with friend, gets deposited down here. And when it gets deposited down here, this computing system starts working on it. Starts thinking of, okay, well, what's your price range? What part of town do you like? What are the special holidays? What are the special deals available? What does your friend like? What does your friend not like? What's convenient? Where did you have a bad thing happen and you want to avoid? What are your triggers? What kind of food do you like? There's a lot of variables out there. What time is it busy, etc., etc. So there's so many variables that you can't consciously compute all of them. So what happens is you say, I'm going to get back to your friend. It gets over here, and your mind starts computing all of these variables. And at some point, it's like, okay, it finds the one answer that satisfies as many conditions as possible, and it pops it back up here. And you say, okay, I want to go to dinner at Humpty's, because that's just, what you like to do. And it works, so you go and you have fun. So another example is Einstein. Einstein had a very powerful subconscious mind. He knew that there were some deeper truths to life, and he started kind of working on things. And, so he started parking the gravitational fields and the general theory, like the mathematics and things, and eventually all the mathematics led him to E equals mc squared, the general theory of relativity, how it all comes together, the perfection of it. It was his subconscious mind that figured it all out, and then his conscious mind that popped it out. So most people like to try to think through their problems. It doesn't work well. Works far better to park your problem and meditate and allow your mind to strengthen and work on things and give you the answer. This is why writer's block happens when people are, for example, unable to sort of think of what to write next. And the more they focus on it, the more attention they put on that, the harder it gets, and they get frustrated. But when the writer distracts himself or herself, relaxes the mind, it works well. And then it pops up the answer that allows you to overcome the writer's block. So this is the conscious mind and subconscious mind. But actually, this is not accurate. The truth of the matter is, the conscious mind is a tiny little figment, tiny little hole, and the subconscious is a vast place. So the subconscious mind is actually far bigger, far bigger than the conscious mind. So we are actually conscious of a very small fraction of what's in our minds. Very important to understand. So if you thought you dealt with something, because you think that there's nothing in your mind happening with it, well, you know what, unless you're aware of the subconscious mind, you aren't actually aware. So some people, for example, will describe, mentally I'm well, everything's great, but you know what, at night I have terrible nightmares. Why might that be? Well, when we are going to sleep, we cross over a little bit into our subconscious space. So then when we do that, then you get the access to some of that material, and sometimes it's a little scary because there is stuff there. So important points to understand: conscious mind, subconscious mind. Conscious space occupies a tiny fraction. The vast majority of our mind contains subconscious thoughts. So I've blown it up here because I want to illustrate some important points. According to the yogis, and I suspect it is accurate, our minds are constantly generating thoughts. So thoughts are generated at a rate, they say, of 1,000 thoughts per blink of the eye. That's the power of the mind, or 10,000 thoughts per second. You might disagree on the actual number, but the point is the mind's ability to generate thoughts is vast. So you have a thought, and where that thought comes from can be anywhere. But the point is, a thought gets generated. A thought the vast majority of our thoughts, they don't actually really, they kind of might come into the consciousness, but then they're gone, or maybe they don't even enter. So let's say you have 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 thoughts, 999 will go by the wayside and you won't really even be aware of them. And in the one thought that comes, maybe let's change the number here. Let's say of the 10,000 thoughts, maybe let's say so 9,990, I'm just using numbers, go away, you're not aware of them. And then about 10 of these thoughts go into your mind, in your conscious space, so you're aware of them. We can be aware of multiple things at the same time. And then, so you become aware of the thought, and then that thought goes from a normal thought. Again, you dismiss some of them just offhand, just irrelevant, random things, traffic jam on the way to work kind of stuff. Not really that important. And if you don't dwell on it, most of these thoughts actually go away. And let's say 8 of them go away, because most of them do. Then what happens is the remainder of the thoughts go, and then they form what we call complex thought. And these thoughts are like a bunch of thoughts put together, so as to construct, more complex parameters like fantasies and things. And again, most of those go by the wayside, but a couple of them go and they become more real and they become more fleshed out. We'll call it a fantasy or a script. Again, we're able to dismiss many of these, but then the ones that we can't, that persist, and you got to understand this happens lightning quick, right? Like this, all of these things happen quick. Some of these thoughts then go and become, or they go and activate the self. So, like if you're kind of thinking, and sorry, I'm just going to turn on the light here. That's better. So, as the thoughts, if you stay long enough in a fantasy, or in a sort of a script, the way your mind will take it and make it into something actionable is it'll put a desire there, or it'll sort of activate emotions. So your body will have an emotional response, and from there, and it's getting heavier and heavier. Then you get a desire. A desire for action to resolve what's going on. And then action allows you to get rid of, or activate, or fully resolve that thought. And so then it's gone, right? So like, for example, hunger. Hunger comes into your mind. So maybe starts at like, you see a potato chip. Like you're at the superstore and you see a potato chip, and it comes into your, vision, and you're like, oh yeah, I like Lay's, right? So now a potato chip goes to Lay's. Maybe your mind remembers some smells, some of the tastes, and you start kind of building more of a real thing in your mind about it. And then you're unable to dismiss it, even though Lay's is not very healthy for you. And it gets more and more sort of dense. And then eventually it comes to activation of your hunger. So it activates hunger, it activates salivation. It becomes very hard to ignore. And so then you say, well, I'm going to get the Lay's. So you buy the Lay's, you open it up, you eat it, because that's what your fantasy was. And then you've satisfied it. So then the craving goes away, because you've acted on that desire. And in this case, the desire wasn't particularly good, but you acted on it, and so it dealt with it. It's gone. May come back, may not. Action on the emotions and desires results in elimination of the thought, so that you can then begin the cycle again. So that's if you act on something. If you feel guilty after a fight, and you know you should say, I'm sorry and I love you to a loved one, and you don't do it, it gets heavier and heavier in your head. But once you actually do what you should do, which is apologize and say I love you, once you do that, it's like a weight's lifted off your shoulders. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a lovely saying that I really think is applicable to everyone. It's, we are as sick as the secrets that we keep. If we have a secret that's very shameful, we know we should probably tell somebody about it, but we keep it in because, of the shame and the guilt and all that. But once we out it, we feel lighter. So that's an example of that. So now what happens if we don't? What happens when we say, okay, we have this desire, we have this emotion response, let's say it's anger. Let's say we're thinking of a situation that's making us angry. But we don't allow it to go. Instead, we distract ourselves. So once the emotions come, let's say we distract ourselves. Well, now we've created another pathway. We've done what Einstein did. Or we did what you do when you go to dinner. Oh, I wonder what I should eat. I don't know. Yeah, you know what, I'll figure it out later. Let's get on to something else. So, let's try that with anger. Okay, I'm angry. I'm going to have a beer. Or something. Alter my mind in some way, so that I don't have to deal with the anger. And then it actually works, right? Anger goes away. You put your mind somewhere else, you distract yourself, you watch a Netflix movie, and now you're no longer angry. So what happened? Well, you didn't deal with it, right? There was no action, productive action to take care of the problem. Instead, you distracted yourself. With using what I call people, places, things. Our ways of distracting ourselves are actually rather endless. And so this is what I would collectively call self-defeating habit. Maybe that's another way to look at this. And we all have them. Regardless. So now you distracted yourself. What happens to that anger? Well, that anger actually gets deposited. Anger is not something that your subconscious is built for. Your subconscious is built to solve problems that you can't solve in the moment. Anger is not really easy to solve, right? We all know that anger is like an iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of complex things down in it. Shame is another one that's really tough. Fear, right? So we distract ourselves from these negative emotions, and they come, and then over time we start gathering more and more. Some things are tiny, some things are big. So you're taking your subconscious, and over time you keep depositing things. Things that can't be resolved, things you won't resolve, things you don't want to visit. And over time, you turn your beautiful subconscious into a garbage can. And if that goes on long enough, that garbage can becomes a landfill. And we all know landfills are very stinky. So, the interesting thing is, this process actually happens and begins early on in life. So we learn how to do this distract business. We actually learn that from our parents and the adults in our lives. We learn that, as children, to don't talk about your emotions, or man up, right? There's that word out there, or woman up, or don't be a sissy, right? By crying or whatever. And when we, for example, choose not to cry, which is the appropriate action for a lot of emotions, tears in my business are liquid gold. Never interrupt a good cry, as far as I'm concerned. Cry it out. Cry for an hour, 2 hours, whatever. Because it is an amazing adaptation tool. And as a society, we've blocked it down. We've blocked it down. And we use drugs and whatnot to shut that down. And as a result, this process continues. But people aren't aware of it. And some things are bigger than others. And what ends up happening is, when it gets to a certain point of fullness, and it continues to sort of expand itself, because it's trying to help you out, right? It's trying to sort of handle your stuff. It expands, but until at some point it can't expand. It's not an infinite space. It's a finite space. And so at some point it's pretty full. But this process is ongoing. The onslaught of thoughts is non-ending. So it's ongoing. And at some point, you have a trigger. Something happening in your conscious space that you really don't want to deal with. So let's call it the bomb. Something happens, a traffic jam happens, and you're like, really angry. Well, you're going to do what you're going to do. That's all set. You're going to do what you're patterned to do. So you're going to deposit that big ball in here. But the trouble is, there's no space here anymore. The space has gone. But that's still going down there. There's no stopping that. So what happens is it displaces some stuff that's already there. It may be similar stuff, like an explosive, right? Explosion blows up, it displaces stuff. That might be related, it might be old, right? People wonder, why am I thinking about this now, right? They're thinking, I thought I dealt with this, but it's coming up now. I once delivered a stillborn in the Northwest Territories, and this is kind of what doctors do. We deal with stuff, right? I thought I dealt with it. This was in residency. This was 6 years prior. And I delivered a stillborn, 22 weeks. It was a weird scenario, and I didn't think that much of it, other than that I had to, pronounce the death of the baby, let the mother know. Mother was obviously numbed out and in a difficult situation. And yeah, that was that. In hindsight, I do recall eating a lot of bag of chips sometime after that, but I didn't feel overly bothered. I didn't think anything of it. But then all of a sudden, about, I'd say 6 months or a year ago, all of a sudden, all out of nowhere, I was meditating and bang, this memory comes up. Ton of shame, which I know I feel in my face. Powerful. And then, knowing what I know now, I just sat in it. I was like, yeah, I felt that, I allowed myself to cry a little and allow those emotions to come up, and then they were gone. And it hasn't bothered me since. But like most doctors, I don't deal with my emotions, or I didn't back then, as effectively. And so what they do is, new triggers come, and then they leave the garbage can only by displacing old garbage. And so you end up with maybe a bunch of small things, maybe some big things, that then enter your thought generation field, which then enter your consciousness. So instead of getting fresh, original thought, stuff to help you live your life and guide you better. Now you're stuck recycling your landfill. That's pretty stinky business, isn't it? If you just sort of take your landfill, garbage stuff out, put it back in. Out, in, out, in. It's kind of gross. And so this is how people, the more they do this, now this could happen if you're really traumatized, you'll start doing this in your 20s, maybe even in your teens. Maybe you'll have to do things like cutting to deal with it, right? Some people can't deal with it. They commit suicide because this onslaught is so difficult and, can't escape from it all the time. Some people get into addiction, right? But the thing is this pattern plays out in all of mental illness and addiction. And it's a function of how you think. The problem is not this. The problem is not the full garbage can. It really isn't. The problem is this pattern of distracting yourself from with people, places, and things, using people, places, and things, which results in the deposition of the garbage, emotions, let's call it the emotional garbage, that really you should have just dealt with. That if you had just dealt with it, you look at young toddlers, they fight, right? They're like in a playpen and they're like playing, and then all of a sudden one gets upset and the other one gets upset and they let it out. 5 minutes later they're back to playing, happy, because they don't park anything. They don't park emotions. A kid who's healthy, and most young toddlers are very healthy, they don't park anything. They let it out at the moment. They learn from humans, us elder humans, that, you know what? You're not supposed to show your anger. You're not supposed to show your shame. Hide that. It's not becoming, And so they learned that from us. And this is how they developed their landfill. And so that's one way to understand the disease process. And a lot of what we do these days in society is, it's not wrong, but we're stuck. This is a person who's anxious, depressed, has a lot of stuff going on. And what we do is we cope. So we maybe add an antidepressant to the mix. Maybe we drink, right? Lots of functional drunks out there who are drinking, coping, and this is what they're doing. They're expanding their subconscious space so they can cram more stuff in. But the end is always there because the space is always finite. And so until one starts to deal with the emotions, so this is why in psychology we say feel the feelings. That's a very common thing. Feel your feelings as they come up. They dissipate. Honor your feelings. If you're feeling shame, say, yeah, you know what? Thank you, self. I needed to feel that. You're welcome here, feeling, And you start welcoming and transmuting that energy into positivity. You start decompressing this. So there's ways that you can sort of speed up the process. Now, I won't go into them in detail here, but first, you need to start decompressing the garbage can. Sometimes you need medications to sort of create the room so that you're not so overwhelmed that you're going to commit suicide or something like that, right? So there's a role for meds and stuff. But getting rid of this stuff, well, once it's really full, you kind of do need to drain. You need to drain it. And there's two general ways to drain things. And one is to let's just call it out it. This could be through, journaling. This could be through therapy. It could be through, any kind of expression. It could be through physical activity. Right? So outing it, channeling it. And that's helpful. A lot of people cope by putting things out. A lot of DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, focuses on ways to just kind of out things. which helps decompress. And a very helpful thing is meditation. Meditation, what it does, it takes these big things. So let's say it takes this big thing right here, which is really big. And meditation is kind of like a little carburetor, which takes it and breaks it down into small things, little dust. But that dust actually can then be expressed using your journaling, and you can get rid of it. So if all you do is meditate, so last talk we talked about connect to self, connect to others, commit to daily practice. Well, if you're going to connect to yourself, you can take the big stuff and garberate it down into little stuff that's manageable, but then you still got to do something with it. You still got to act on it. If you did someone wrong something, it ain't going to get better until you act on it, right? So this is how that technology can go, but the purpose of this is to just describe a concept and a way of understanding how your mind works and how it can become dysfunctional and how you can restore it to function. And the process of decompressing this can begin at any age. It can begin at 80. I've treated people who are 80 years old, 90 years old. It can begin at the age of 15, 10, right? We should be educating our children in sort of these things, that it's okay to cry, it's okay to be expressive, it's okay to, let things out that are bothering you, even if it's inconvenient for everyone at the time, and then avoid this. But anyone can start decompressing this at any time, and when we do that, health is possible. I don't think anyone's broken. I think we're all sort of blessed humans in this earth, and my hope and my prayer is that we will be able to move forward from where we are. But you can't understand the solution if you don't understand the problem. And so this is my subconscious garbage can analogy. I humbly beg forgiveness if I've offended or said anything incorrect, but I will endeavor to learn. And I always tell patients that actually, as much as they may learn from me, I learn 10 times more from them. So if you do have something about this that you'd like to share, please do share in the comment section, or you can email me. Thank you, and next time we'll talk about some more stuff. It's been a pleasure. Bye now.